What's up guys, and welcome back to Elderwood Games. Thomas here, and today we're talking about color palettes. So in last week's video, I talked about getting started into the 40K hobby, and I mentioned that this week I would talk about a little bit more in depth on how to pick a color palette or a paint scheme for your army and your miniatures. Let's just kind of talk through maybe a few terms that you may have already heard in your current hobby or while getting into it, and help us understand what they mean and how they're going to pertain to you as a hobbyist going forward. When you're looking at joining a tournament, a lot of times they require you to have painted models and have them painted up to what is known as battle ready standard. So while this isn't something that is distinctly ruled in a lot of ways, the general consensus of battle ready means that your models have at least 3 colors of paint on them, and that can include like shades and tints of a single color. So if you wanted to do ultramarines and you had, them generally a ultramarine blue color, a darker blue in the shadows, and a lighter blue on the highlights, that would count as your 3 colors, and the model would be considered battle ready. Now, it also does require that your bases be painted, so they can't just be the standard black base. They need to have either a color on them or need to have, some type of scenery on them to have them considered completed and battle ready. A term that's kind of falling out is parade ready. So this is in reference to armies on parade. This just means that they're kind of a step above that battle ready standard and more in line with something akin to a competition. Now, I don't want you to thinking this means like Golden Demon ready, right? This is just like a little bit more effort is put in than your battle ready standard, and it just looks a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer, probably has quite a bit more paint and a few more colors in there to make them be a bit more complete, so to speak. Wherever you end up falling in that line, whether it's battle ready or parade ready or even competition or commission level, is completely up to you, right? This is your hobby. You should enjoy it the way that you want to, and if you want to play just without painted models, while you may be limited as far as tournament scenes go, most local shops really won't care, and your kind of community may just be okay with that, and that's completely fine as well, and that'll be great, and maybe you just listen on for the rest of this video and gather some inspiration on what you may do when you do decide to paint your models in the future. But this video is more directed to those that are looking for a paint scheme and looking for some advice when putting together their paints to decide what colors they would like and how to make some colors work that they may not anticipate should work together. First off, I recommend gathering some inspiration. So if you're a big lore head and you already have maybe your Space Marine chapter or Hive Fleet that you're already planning to paint on, you can just gather the paints needed to fill that scheme and learn how to manipulate the colors within it, just to give yourself some variety if that's what you want. Lore and that sort of thing is a great way to get inspired. That's where I got a lot of the inspiration for my Salamanders army. It's definitely a way to go, and it can be a nice way to get things started and have a lot of different references and artwork to be able to pursue when doing so. But if you want something a bit different and a bit more unique or customized to something that you enjoy, you can look at things like artwork, favorite paintings or art pieces that you really enjoy, and adapting the colors or items from within that into your schemes and building around those things. The next thing would be to look at nature, look at nature photography. My Tau are actually based around sort of a woodland scheme, so they are meant to kind of be a little bit camouflage, but also just have colors akin to that, and that was what I was going for. So that's why they're all browns and blacks and greens, to just kind of mimic that environment. You could also look at animals. So here's a picture of a Picasso bug. So this was actually a potential scheme that I had after painting a few Tyranids, where I was like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to maybe adapt this bug for my Tyranids and have them look a little bit different and be honestly a bit more colorful and bright than they are. I did end up ditching that idea. Obviously, I ended up sticking with the pinks and the iridescent and that sort of thing. And I'm kind of glad I did. I think I like that mine are they're not necessarily unique. I actually have seen a few other similar schemes, but this is the scheme I came up with and I stuck with it. and I do like how that came out. And of course, you know, if you just want to decide on colors that you like, that's actually how I came up with my Tyranids. I went to Games Workshop and picked out a few Citadel paints, and I was like, I really want these all to work together. And I basically, honestly, I just forced a paint scheme out of those colors, and that's what I ended up coming up with, is this scheme. And we'll talk about in a minute about how you can take sort of random colors and combine them together to make a scheme here in just a sec. We're gonna get a little bit into some art theory kind of talk, but just keep in mind that like color theory and that sort of thing, while it's important to have an idea of and maybe be able to communicate when you're talking about colors, and it does sort of help you navigate some other choices as well. It's not necessarily required in order to paint well. You don't need to have a degree in painting and drawing to paint models well. I have plenty of friends that can outclass me in painting minis. But we are going to talk a little bit about color theory here, and the reason being is that it's just going to help us kind of understand why some colors just really don't like working together, while other colors work pretty well together. For starters, let's just talk through a few different color schemes from color theory that can work and be used for your models. First up is simply monochromatic. So if you want an army that has a single color and just the shades and tints, the darks and the lights of that color within it, you'll be looking more at a monochromatic scheme. Most Space Marine chapters fall into this, having, you know, their armor be just a single color with some highlights and lowlights to kind of make it feel more three-dimensional. This is what you would be kind of looking at there. And obviously you can pick in some accent colors and the like, but we'll talk a little bit more about those sorts of things in just a sec. The next one is going to be analogous colors. So analogous colors are ones that are next to each other within the color wheel. So if you think about starting with blue, you may decide to have purple and green be the analogous colors there and build a scheme around those three. This is a nice way to do it because they're all kind of grouped together on the color wheel. It makes it very easy to switch between the three colors, or even two colors if you just do two that are right beside each other. And then you can kind of choose which one to be more of a dark color and a light color, mixing them together to create a more cohesive scheme that way. Next up is complementary. Now, the name is a little bit misleading. So complementary means that they are directly across from one another on the color wheel. So like red and green, for example, would be complementary. Now, complementary colors, ironically, are a bit jarring to look at side by side. This is because they have a very intense difference between them. So when you're looking at both of them side by side, it can be a bit jarring. Now, a lot of us know green and red from Christmas time, and that's another thing about those two in particular, is that they have that connotation of those things. And you may want to think about that as well when you're putting together your army. So if you wanted like yellow and red, for example, you want to avoid looking like McDonald's. And if you wanted green and yellow, make sure you're avoiding Subway or BP and other things as well. Unless that's your vibe. If you want it to be based on those things, that could be a really funny way to paint your army, to grim darkify your favorite restaurant brand, what have you. But if you're trying to avoid that and you're trying to make a scheme that looks unique and doesn't evoke, you know, the feelings of hunger and the like, you'll want to kind of consider those things if you're looking at colors that have brands associated with them. And last of the like color theory ones I wanted to talk about is triadic colors. So triadic colors basically means three colors that are equally distant on the color wheel. You can think your primary colors of red, yellow, and blue, or your secondary colors of green, purple, and orange as your kind of main triadic colors. These are balanced very well. They are able to be used very easily. So while those are sort of the color theory and, you know, art school ways of looking at color and looking at your schemes, it's not the only way to do so. It does kind of help you kind of think about if you wanted to add another color, maybe to think about what color to add in order to help kind of push your scheme to the next level. In reality, you can pick random colors and paint them on your models, and you'll be able to create a scheme in that way if you would like. So how do we make paints that we want to use work together? Now, obviously we can build them out into a scheme like we were just talking about a second ago, but honestly an easier way to do it, and one that kind of fits the 40K universe, is to grim dark it a bit. You know, you can add in paint chips and the like. Just this little bit of extra texture by, you know, sponging on the black like I've done with my Mechanicum and my old Tau models, is it just helps to kind of break the color up. And because it's scattered across the colors that you've already painted on your model, it's going to evoke a oneness within the model. And that's going to help make it feel like it's all existing at the same time on the same model. And it's not going to feel as jarring because there's a little bit of just sort of visual delineation when you're looking at those sorts of things. So yeah, you can kind of paint chip it a little bit. Another way to do it is also with washes. Most commonly you'll see like Nuln Oil or Agrax Earthshade from Citadel, but you can also make your own with your stuff at home. Really, you just need water and the paint color that you want to use, and you want to mix them together until you get a nice runny kind of scheme. So like this is my brown and green wash. As you can see, it's basically impossible to look through. It's a bit more like a milk consistency. You can go a bit more water if you want it to be a little bit thinner. I don't know if you necessarily want to go too thick, just because then you may just end up painting over what you've already done. You do want this to kind of create a little bit of a mask over everything, but to mainly reside in the recesses of the model, to help push the deepest, darkest bits on there. Another way to provide a little bit of kind of cohesion with your colors is to actually mix them together. And you can obviously do this on your palette, or you can also thin them into sort of a glaze consistency, similar to what you would do with a wash, but just a little bit thicker to kind of help mix the colors together, to have it work like that. And that's something I actually did with my Tyranids, with the green that I use on their fleshy bits. When putting it into the vents, I actually use a bit more of a wash consistency to put it in there. So that way it still has a little bit of the blue from the actual skin tone itself, but with that greenish tinge from glazing over that color. And that's just a quick way to be able to kind of add some cohesion to your paint schemes and be able to make almost any color work together as a whole. Another thing when considering how to make a palette work is considering sort of your ratios of color. So we talked about the color schemes and, you know, how to, you know, evenly distribute and that sort of thing. But in reality, what you're going to come across is that you don't necessarily want all your models to be equally the same colors every single time. You will want to have one color to be sort of an accent color, so something that really stands out on the model and is just a focal point for it. You'll likely have one that's more of a base color. So if we think about it this way, with the ultramarines, their base color is obviously the base ultramarine blue, but they use whites and blues as accent colors to add a little bit more visual interest. This is where I'll get into a little bit of kind of showing some of my stuff so you can kind of have a better idea. So for my Tau, as an example, I actually have two commanders here. I'll show the second one here in a sec. So this is an example of my Tau. This is one of my Cold Star commanders. And as you can see, it's got a lot of black and a lot of brown. So the brown is more of the base color in this instance. And the black is what I would call an accessory color in this. So it's kind of filling in some gaps, kind of filling in where I didn't necessarily need the brown to be, and being just sort of the stock color of the metal itself. With the Tau, from a lore standpoint, they have set colors, and this set color is actually green, and those of higher rank actually are able to use the color more. So while this person is a commander, they have less green than my other commander. So this is actually my warlord for my army. So as you can see, they have a lot of green, and it's almost the inverse of the other one, where brown sort of becomes the accent color, and green being more of the primary or base color. And that's one way that you can kind of delineate between it. I know with Space Marines, from a lore perspective, they do have ways of kind of pushing and pulling some of the colors and using more in some areas than others. But you're free to kind of do that. You're free to kind of explore and expand and use the colors as you intend to. And it's a little bit easier with armies that are more, you know, armor focused or in sort of similar suits and that sort of thing. So when we're looking at my Tyranids, basically any place there is their chitin, that's always going to be pink. Any place where there's sort of flesh or weapons, it's going to be this green color. And then their kind of skin is the blue with the pink dry brush and highlight. So in this instance, it's sort of a formula that is designed, and because they are natural, it follows that pattern throughout. And then I also have my Norn Emissary here, and as you can see with its brain bits, it starts with the same green as the flesh and weapons, but we actually push it further and we push it more into a yellow green to just sort of emphasize it a bit more and have a little bit more variation on the minis themselves, which is ultimately going to make having some slight variance between things. It's just going to make it a little bit more interesting to look at, and also give you something to look forward to while you're painting. Because as you're kind of doing the hobby, you can get pretty bored if you're just painting the same thing the same way every single time. So having some slight changes between, you know, units or models to kind of give yourself a little bit more freedom and the ability to kind of change and make some differences and that sort of thing can actually increase the fun of the hobby, in my opinion. And because you're keeping all the colors the same and that sort of thing, or, you know, maybe branching out a little bit, it's going to feel very cohesive. So a pretty extreme example of this would actually be my Mechanicum army for Horus Heresy. So while their main colors are this sort of grungy silver and the blue you see there, they also have panels of armor in multiple different colors. And then I've also given them the green in their weapons and lenses to be another color to sort of keep them together. So there are Archmagos here wearing the blue robes, and actually has more of a golden scheme, but because of the blue and the, you know, bringing it together with the base as well, they feel like they're in the same troop. And looking at one of my Ursarax here, as you can see, we've got the blue, the silver, and that kind of lime green on the lenses there. But this one actually has some pinks and magentas as its extra colors. But they still feel cohesive through having the shared silver, the shared blue, but also the shared base type, and then all the grunginess as well. So they have the silver paint chips and washes in black, and that just helps tie them together in a way that they really shouldn't work together. You know, they have tons of colors between them, but because of doing it the way that I did, we were able to get that all set up and ready to go. These have been my tips on how to create custom paint schemes for your army and things to think about before diving headfirst into your hobby painting journey. Obviously, like I said in last week's video, if you have multiple schemes in mind, it may be a good idea to get a few paints and test those out on your battle line from maybe your combat patrol or your first purchase. That way you can figure out what's gonna work, what isn't gonna work, and what you may need to tweak a little bit in your paint selection in order to make it work the way that you want it to look for your army going forward. But just like last week's video, if you have any tips and tricks on how you came up with your color scheme or how you may tackle a color scheme in the future, please leave them in the comments down below as newer players kind of come to these videos to find advice for their painting journeys going forward. But thank you all so much for watching, and especially making it here to the end of the video. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you all in the next one.